in doing all of that, we might think, man, I'm down, I'm discouraged, blah, blah, blah. But it says in verse 10, then God will lift you up.
Welcome to today's episode of Walking in Faith, a podcast to help you grow in your daily walk with God. Join Treg and David in this study of James as they take a closer look at the dangers of being double-minded. If you enjoyed today's study, please subscribe and share it with someone else.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Walking in Faith, this video, vlog, podcast, whatever you want to call it, brought to you from Faith Baptist Church and right here in Morgantown, West Virginia. And we've been going through the book of James. David, how is the book of James going so far?
I think it's going really well. I think we've been able to tie in a lot of biblical truths to some practical application. And I mean, if nothing else, I've enjoyed doing these in the morning.
Yeah, no, it's been good. And I am as well, and Lord willing, our listeners are enjoying it. Every now and then we get some feedback, which is good and which we're thankful for. There is a little time and energy that goes into this, but definitely worth it as we just take opportunities to teach the Word.
Yeah. I think we have gotten some good feedback. I think it's worth mentioning that a lot of people. Well, not a lot. A few people have asked that maybe we do like a Q&A episode. So if you ever have any questions about stuff we're talking about or life or how the Bible applies to a certain situation, feel free to comment it. And if we get a few of those, we might have to do an episode.
That would be really good.
Some of those.
Yeah, I think that would be really good. And, I've got a coffee with 3 college guys, maybe 4 on Monday at 11. And those guys are going to nail me with questions. And I'll try to remember those. And maybe when the coffee's done, I'll sit in the car and write those questions down. And, we can start taking some of those questions that are out there and looking at them and talking about them just in what's relevant to today and where we are today. And so as we dive in now to James chapter 4, James says, where are wars and where do fightings come from among you? And so we have these fightings, we have these wars, and James says then that they come of your lust. So it's even of your own lust that war in your members. You lust and you have not, you kill, you desire to have, you cannot obtain, you fight, you war, you have not because you ask not, you ask, you receive not because you ask amiss, that we may consume it upon our lust. You adulterers and adulteresses, know you not that the friendship of the world is the enemy or enmity with God? Whosoever therefore will be a friend of the world is the enemy of God. Bam. All right, so I'll ask you a question this morning. What has been the theme of this whole video series in James? What have we said from the beginning? What are we talking about? What do we try to keep coming back and emphasizing? Keeping it within context. And again, there's a lot of argument on the context of James and da-da-da-da-da. But I see double-mindedness coming through time after time after time. And you can't get any more double-minded than the person mentioned in verse 4. It's an adulterers and adulteresses. Right? You have your marriage and then you have your marriage outside of marriage. Okay, so which one is it? Am I in love with the one that I'm married to, or am I in love with the one that I'm not married to, that I'm having a sexual relationship with? And that's the ultimate of double-mindedness, David. And so, boom, in verse 4, he's like, wow, here it is. So then you look at the rest of it, and it's double-mindedness again. And when we use the word lust, when James uses the word lust, we can tie it. We say, well, it's adulteresses, so it's sexual. It's just about desires. Okay, so this whole thing is about desires. It's about you lust and you have not, but it's because you desire to have. And so they're wanting these things, and they're desiring these things that are there. And what's interesting is, okay, they want, and then James kind of continues that idea, David, over in chapter 5 in verse 1. Where he says, go to now, you rich men, weep and howl, for your miseries that shall come upon you. Your riches are corrupted, your garments are moth-eaten, your gold and your silver is cankered, and the rust of them shall be a witness against you, and shall eat your flesh as if it were fire, as you heap treasure together in the last days. So he's saying, okay, look, you guys are desiring to have, you want these things, you're lusting after these things, but let's say, excuse me, you get these things, right? So you get the wealth, you get the riches, you get the, what's my daughter, what's all the clothes today, you know, Lululemon or whatever it is. And you've got your closets full and your drawers full of all these clothes. And let's say that you do have, you know, designer closet. And, you know, from the golf side, let's say this whole closet and a whole section of Peter Millan polos, all my golfing polos. And I've sacrificed and I've worked hard and this is what I want, this is what I desire. And I go to pull one out of the closet. When I do, it just falls apart, right? And then let's just keep with that theme. And I've spent $3,000 on golf clubs. And I go to grab a golf club to swing it. And it just disintegrates into rust. And it's no good anymore. It's just the tungsten is melted out of it. I don't know. And then here's everything that I've built. And it's gone. And James is like, look, you guys, all this turmoil and all this anguish and all this frustration and all this war among you, it's all because you want. But do you not realize, as he says again, you know, at the end of chapter 4, you can have all these things, but David, there's no even guarantee of tomorrow. Mm. So despite having all these things, we can't take them with us. And even still, they're going to amount eventually to nothing, right? And so when we look at life then, and we look at life's desires, what should we be desiring, David? I mean, what should we be filling our lives with? What do you think?
Well, obviously, you know, filling our lives with God, and I think that's pursuing a closer relationship with Him, pursuing the things that He wants us to pursue. Loving on others, spreading the gospel, all of those things is what we should ultimately be chasing after.
Right. So I think if you go down to verse 8, draw nigh to God. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's what we want. That's what we desire. What stems our lust? I mean, why do we start off wanting these things? What causes a 12, 13-year-old girl to want these brands? Why are our teenagers wearing $200 slides?
Yeah.
You know, what's the draw with that?
I think it kind of starts, well, you know, obviously being double-minded, and it talks about in verse 4 being a friend of the world. Mm-hmm. I think that's where it starts, because it sounds much less maybe ominous to say, you know, that you start out as a friend of the world. So it might just start as an interest, or desiring a few of those things, and then I think that just grows and grows, and then you realize, well, you can't have a relationship with God and a relationship with the world. Mm-hmm. I think that'd be probably a big part of it. All
right, so then, so instead of you questioning me, I get to question you now.
Yeah.
What is the world? I mean, are Nike slides the world? Are you know, name brand clothes, Under Armour, the world? What is the world?
So I think you'd have to go to, 1 John 2, 15, 16, 17. Okay, yeah. So lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. Mm-hmm. So obviously, you know, clothes aren't necessarily sinful, but if that's feeding your pride of life, if that's kind of puffing yourself up, well, then I think it would be being a friend of the world. Yeah. Is how maybe I would look at it or
That's
teach
good.
it.
That's good. How I would look at the world, it's a system, right? So from the time of James until today, you have this underlying system of the world, and so this is the system that's functioning. This is what's going on, and so when we look at the system of the world, where I watch, and I've got to be careful, even with the life of my children, is seeing that system sneak into our home. Mm. Now, James didn't have to worry about this then, but again, James, I think when he's talking about the lust, desiring to have, it goes back to what he says, silver and gold. Now, that'd be nice. Today, we'd love to have that, you know. What's the old song, Silver and Gold? I think it was on the old, you wouldn't know, but like back in the day, the Rudolph Christmas cartoon, I think, Silver and Gold. But anyway, that was a world system to them. in these things. You know, he's talking about the rich and their silver and their gold and their garments. And in Bible times, the poor made their own clothes, and the rich had their garments. And James talks about that in chapter 2. You know, that you favor the ones that have their nice garments, and the ones that have their handmade garments you're not paying any attention to. So we see a contrast with that. So let's just tie all that back in here. So that's that system of wealth that's there, that's not a sin. But if that's my modus operandi, if that is my system of living, I've got a problem.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
You know, so if I'm being consumed with these websites and I'm being consumed with these advertisements, and the world system today is bringing in everything from the acceptance of transgenderism to the acceptance of I don't even know what I am anymore, and they're pushing that. And we're seeing that system come. And I even think like even a system of violence. You know, a lot of these shows that are really popular today are violence, or they're it's we're living in a society that hates bullying and doesn't celebrate bullying, but at the same time we are entertained by it. You know, we've got a baby doll Megan that goes around killing people. It is like one of the most popular shows that are out there.
Yeah.
And what's that coming from? I mean, it's this big bully baby doll, and we're all watching it. And all of that is part of a system that we've got to be careful that doesn't come into our children, that come into our own lives and begin lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, the pride of life, you know, these things that are in the world that are there, and they start to take over. Okay, so if that means eliminating certain things out of my life, or certain things that we're not going to watch in our home, whatever it is, then so be it. If it means that we're getting rid of traditional cable and we're just going to streaming, and then I can see what my kids are streaming, do it. You know, and then you can pick and choose whatever it has to be. But you talk about raising a generation that has no idea what's going on. It's because we are combining the world system with God's system, and it doesn't work. You know, do we love the world and the things of the world, or do we love God and the things of God? Jesus makes it clear you cannot love God and what? Mammon. The world system, money. So we've got to make a choice in what are we emphasizing, and what are we encouraging people to do or not to do, and what is that choice? And so James is like, look, you ask amiss, because why do you want these things? It's because it's of our own lust. And it's what I think is going to make me happy, and what I think is going to meet that need when it's only God. And so does not, he said, the scripture say in vain, the spirit that dwelleth in us lusteth to envy. And it's, I gotta have, look at those shoes. I need those clothes. I want this. It's just lusting to envy. So what's the answer? This contrast to the world system, David. What's the answer to fulfill what we need? And James gives us that. So you go down and you look at verse 6, and it says, but he giveth more grace. Despite all of that, you know, we have the word give, and then we have the word grace, which goes along with the idea of gift, you know? And so he gives gifts, and he gives more grace. So God gives us grace to handle these situations, but remember, God resists the proud, but he's only going to do that for the humble. So we've got to keep ourselves humble, and in that humble state of mind, what do we do in verse 7? We submit. Okay, we submit ourselves, therefore, to God, to rank under, to cast ourselves under the authority of God. So it's not I, Paul would say later, it's Christ. And so I need to submit myself to God. Then when it comes to the world and the world system and these lusts and the devil, I've got to, verse 7, resist. No, okay? I can't allow Satan, and I can't allow the devil, and I can't allow these temptations to come my way. Okay, so I've got to resist the devil and put off the devil. By doing so, he will what? He will flee. Paul says that when temptation comes, we have a way of escape. the thing is, many times we find ourselves in these situations. Either we're too tired to fight, we don't feel like it. Our flesh desires to have, and those desires outrule our desire to draw nigh to God. And it's this battle that's going on. John Piper would say, when he was a young man and sexual temptations would come, he'd always go outside. And then he would just look at creation and what God had and just spend some time drawing nigh to God outside. And he said it'd be amazing how that would just help purify my heart and my mind and seeing God in his creation or whatever it is. And so I think we've got to draw nigh. We've got to resist. We need to cleanse our hands, verse 8, purify our hearts. And there's our word again, double-minded. And humble yourselves, there's that word again in verse 10, in the sight of the Lord, and he will lift you up. So the world system is not worth it. And as badly as we might want, or the badly as we might desire, the question would be for what? But the key, I think, to Christian living, the key to abstaining from double-mindedness is right here in verses 6, 7, and 8. So we've got to humble ourselves. We've got to submit ourselves. We've got to resist the devil. We've got to draw nigh to God. We've got to cleanse our hands, and we've got to purify our hearts. And in doing all of that, we might think, man, I'm down, I'm discouraged, blah, blah, blah. But it says in verse 10, then God will lift you up. Mm-hmm. Right? And so God will take care of doing with us the way that he wants to do with us. Even like we talked about last week. Oh, I want to be this and I want to be that. Well, look, those guys didn't go out seeking an audience. Stanley and Swindoll and MacArthur and Sproul and those guys, they weren't seeking an audience. God gave them one. And, John MacArthur has 3,500 people in his church every single Sunday. And if you don't get there in time, you don't get a seat. But he's not doing anything other than just getting up, preaching that one sermon, and he's done. And then it goes out around the world. And so God, in a way, has lifted those guys up to be where they want to be. And God will do the same with you, and God will do the same with us. But I think we've got to follow these steps, because if we don't, and then, David, you mentioned it in our last study, people will see through the pride in a heartbeat. Mm-hmm. And see the arrogance and see these people, puffed up and exalting themselves instead of God. So thank you for joining us today and walking in faith as we dove into chapter 4 and looked at the world system and God's answer for that. And so again, we encourage you to like this channel, to subscribe to it, to tell others about it, and let your family members, aunt and uncles, great aunt and uncles, cousins, second cousins, third cousins know they're missing out by not watching David and walking in faith. Thanks for tuning in today, and we'll see you next time.